And welcome to WizeUp. I'm Paul Arthur. Looking forward to the conversation here today. I want to talk a bit about anti-Semitism. It really bothers me, actually. It's one of those things. I'm not Jewish myself, but when I see so much of this happening across Canada and around the world, I kind of wonder what happens when I see seemingly very intelligent people making some really odd statements about Israel, about Jews in general. Sometimes verbally just supporting, even cheering for the events of October the 7th, the Hamas massacre in Israel. What is going through people's minds when they speak out like that, or they're on X and tweeting and so forth, right? So joining us to discuss this is Barbara Kay. She is an award-winning journalist. She's written for many years at the National Post. And more recently, she also writes for the Western Standard. And you can check out her articles, her writings at barbarak.ca. So good to have you with us, Barbara.
Thanks for having me, Paul. I'm glad to be here.
Well, lots to talk about. It's been kind of a crazy year. Right here in Canada, right, land of the free, we see hostage posters vandalized. What's up with that, right? Jewish school children bullied. We see protesters, of course, holding up signs, Israel, should be wiped out and so forth. Long-term protests being allowed at our universities. You're Jewish yourself. How does this impact you?
Well, I don't know any Jew that it hasn't impacted.
Yeah.
And I think certainly after October 7th, the immediacy with which the sympathy for the victims of the Hamas pogrom, which is what I call it, that pogrom is a sustained um, attack and a mob attack on Jews for being Jews. Uh, the sympathy lasted barely 24 hours
Hmm.
before the blowback
Yeah.
began, and
Mhm.
the blame was attached to Israel, and the hostages were forgotten. The actual victims, the murder victims, the babies burned alive, the family. There were atrocities amongst these 1,200 people killed in Israel that were truly stomach turning. It was all forgotten in within a day in certain quarters, and uh, then all the anger against Israel
Mhm.
center stage, and it has been nonstop since then. So I certainly, like other Jews, I was stunned by the immediacy of and how organized it was of the reversal of what should have been, where
It
they
is
should have.
hard to. It's
Yeah.
hard for me to fathom, to understand that. Again, I'm just curious what's going through, people's minds. These are people in authority. They're highly paid, highly intelligent, and making statements that are just kind of bizarre, really, and again, heartless, frankly. And here we are, the 1 year anniversary of October the 7th. Right here in Canada, steps in the Vancouver courthouse, right? We saw flag burnings, burning the Canadian flag, and protesters shouting, of course, death to Israel, but also death to Canada. I thought, you
Yes.
know, uh,
This is a movement. Yes, this is a movement that is not. Israel has been the first and the most significant, uh, uh, object of the anger and the hatred. But behind it is a hatred of the West and a
hmm,
hatred of what the West stands for. And anybody who thinks that this is just a Jewish problem should really do a little research about the actual groups involved in this hate movement. This is a hatred not just of Jews; it's also a hatred of Christians and of Westerners in general, and the West and its values and everything it stands for. So, although it's a bigger than a Jewish problem, certainly the Jews are the primary
right.
uh, you know, they're the primary objectives right now
Hmm.
and for the expression of this hatred, Jewish institutions, Jewish,
You know,
yeah. So,
Well, I guess I'm just wondering, where is the outrage and the condemnation that should be coming from our federal government authorities? And we're seeing a lot of tepid responses from too many politicians, frankly, right?
mhm. Very
Yes.
tepid. I would say of the four places in the world where, outside of Israel, where there is a significant Jewish presence, which would be, of course, overwhelmingly the United States,
Hmm.
which has 5 or 6 million Jews, Canada with its 400,000 Jews, France with, I think, possibly, is it 600,000, or in the UK, France,
Hmm.
um, Canada and the United States. Certainly, Canada's reaction has been the most tepid. Uh, Prime Minister Trudeau was only there was only one other G7 national leader who did not go to Israel to express sympathy right afterwards. That was the Japanese leader, who, I think Japan, there are virtually no Jews in
Right.
Japan,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
they have no connection with Israel, pretty well. So that can be excused. But certainly, we are an ally. Israel is an ally of Canada's, and Trudeau basically just decided he was not going to be unequivocal in his support. He made a decision very, very quickly that he was not going to be unequivocal in his support for Israel. That was a political decision.
Well, yeah, does this tie in with essentially votes, right? I mean, really, what bottom line is, of course, politicians are always looking for votes, and is this somehow connected? The
Yes, there's no question that, very actually quite early in his career, when he went into politics, the riding that he represented, Papineau, if I recall, was quite a densely Muslim population,
no, okay,
and since then he has always been very, very conscious of the Muslim vote, and I should say, that the Muslim population is growing by leaps and bounds because a lot of the immigration that's
right,
coming in
yeah, hmm,
is Muslim, but the Jewish population is static or in decline. It's actually in decline because the birth rate amongst
yeah,
Jews
hmm,
in Canada is not high. So he has made a calculation, and that calculation translates into, well, there are 40 ridings in Canada where the Muslim vote can make or break
okay,
the candidate's success, and there are four, perhaps four ridings in Canada where the Jewish vote is significant enough to actually tilt, the outcome. Uh,
right. So
there,
this is perhaps going on behind the scenes here,
yeah,
and maybe that's why we're not seeing the outrage. I mean, I'm curious to know what the response would have been from our foreign minister had the protesters been burning Palestinian flags and saying, shouting "Death to Palestine." Maybe something different, possibly. Just saying. Um, now, some say that Canada needs to ensure that there are consequences for this kind of bad behavior. That maybe we should even go as far as deporting people who are going to be celebrating the murder and rape of innocent people in Israel. Your thoughts?
I that's a question that has to be looked at. Certainly, I would say that, for example, if you have students coming from um, Islam-dominated countries that are
Hmm.
here
Right.
and hoping to stay, and you are taking part in these hate
Hmm.
demonstrations, I think that is something that should be on your record. And if you do apply to stay, I don't think that is the kind of person that we would want to make a citizen of Canada. So I think maybe not starting to deport people right and left. Although, yes, if you are fronting for a terrorist organization such as Samidoun, which
Yeah.
has just been listed as it took a long time. It should
Yeah.
have been
Hmm.
sooner, but as say somebody, this Charlotte Cates, who claims to be a Canadian citizen, and she is out and out in front saying she supports the murder of Jews. She supports the,
Yeah.
eradication of Israel, has no problem saying very hateful things. Yes, I say, send her back.
Deportation's an option
Well,
then.
send her back
Yeah.
to the United
Okay.
States. She didn't come from here,
Yeah, I mean, there
so
has to be some sort of consequence.
I
I'm
think so.
thinking as well. I think a lot of Canadians would agree with you on that. Now, a lot of university leaders, of course, have been joining the anti-Zionist campaign. Some even going as far as we just talked about celebrating the violence.
Mhm.
Now, there have since then there have been some backpedaling. Okay, I apologize, I was out of line there, that sort of thing. But again, what goes through their minds? Um, this is Canada, North America, Europe. This doesn't fit with our culture. So
Well,
why would they?
it shouldn't fit with our culture, but
Yeah.
I can tell you I can tell you what's going through their mind
Okay.
is what is justice? What is righteousness? Well, supporting this Palestinian cause is righteous, and supporting Israel would be to be on the side of uh, the country that is responsible for many human rights evils.
Hmm.
They associate these ideologues believe that Israel is kind of the avatar for all the human rights evils of our day, and namely apartheid, racism, and colonialism. In fact, and demonstrably, Israel is not guilty of any of those social crimes.
Hmm.
But they have decided that Israel is. I mean, ideology is a funny thing.
Hmm.
Once you say no, this is how it is, and somebody says no, I can prove that it isn't.
Right. Yeah.
Words mean nothing to them. They have made their choice that Palestinianism, it is actually a kind of mini ideology in itself, that the worst victims in the world today are the Palestinians, and
Well, when you
that's
look at that, though, if we're talking about human rights, um, again, if you send somebody over from the LGBTQ community to Gaza, they're not going to stay alive very long, frankly,
but
because
you're
that.
talking rationally. You're
Yeah,
making
and I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying. I'm just saying it.
I know.
Realistically, they are. They're violent against people who see things differently when it comes to sexual orientation and so forth. So, and yet we see some of these groups supporting them, and I think, like,
Yeah,
why would you support Palestine?
because
If you know them,
because they believe in an ideology called intersectionality.
hmm,
And that ideology says that all oppressed people, I mean, the world's divided up into, this is a Marxist philosophy. The world is divided into the oppressors and those who are
hmm,
oppressed.
right,
And once you have been labeled as being in whichever category you're slotted, and Zionism has been labeled as an oppressor
right,
movement, then everything you do, it doesn't matter what you actually are. It doesn't matter that Israel is amongst the freest countries in the world, that freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of,
yeah,
doesn't matter that
hmm.
no Arab country has a single Jew in it, but there are 2 million Arab citizens with full rights. Doesn't matter that
Yeah,
Christians,
well, I'm glad you're saying that because I wonder how many people actually are aware of that, or maybe they are and they just choose to forget. I'm not sure.
they,
Your thoughts on that?
if you do a minimal amount of research on
Yeah.
Israel, you
Hmm.
will find that it is, and many Christian groups know because they go there all the time.
Yeah.
There's more
Yeah. Yeah.
Christian tourism in Israel than any other kind. You will know that it's only in Israel, amongst that whole region, where Christians have full rights, are fully protected, are feel physically secure. I quite often ask the question on X, which I'm on far too much, I must say. Uh, but I ask the question, let's even grant that you think Israel is a horrible, evil country. Okay, fine.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's why you are so angry at Israel, because of the way you claim that they are treating the Palestinians. I say, what is your beef against the Christians? What have the Christians done to you that you treat them so terribly in the various countries?
Hmm.
They are
Hmm.
second class citizens. They do not have equal rights. They are fearful about their institutions. There are church, vandalisms and burnings, and sometimes mini pogroms where Christians get killed. Nobody even hears about it. Right now in Nigeria, it's not an Arab country, but it's a
Hmm.
North Africa. Right now, there's a horrible slaughter of Christians going
Yeah.
on, terrible
Hmm.
persecution, but you don't hear about it. You don't hear about it because our media are obsessed. with Israel, and they only will report. I mean, the Syrian civil war, 500,000 people died, but you won't hear about that because uh, they only care about anything they can pin on the state of Israel. So this is anti-Semitism in its newest disguise. You know, we've gone from anti-Semitism that is based in religion, uh, and then anti-Semitism based in racism, Hitler, and now we have anti-Semitism based in nationhood. And so Israel is kind of the Jew who you it's fair game to persecute
Yeah.
because that nation is the incarnation of evil. It has nothing to do with reality. And as you said,
Yeah.
you see these banners, Queers for Palestine. Everybody has argued with these people. Don't you understand? You would be safe in Israel, but you would not be safe in these. They don't
Is
want to
it?
hear about that. They're
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
I just have to scratch my head on those issues. And
I know
part of
it,
it.
and your words, the words mean nothing. Like we can only use words that we know the precise meaning of. You and I can have a discussion because when I say the word terrorism to you, you know what I'm talking about.
Is it? Well,
And
it's interesting. You mentioned media, and of course, mainstream media today. I mean, to what degree do they influence, our culture? The opinion on anti-Semitism, the opinions on Israel, and so forth. Because words matter. I notice that a lot of media outlets are very hesitant to call something terrorism, as you just pointed out
very
there. Rather, they'll say, "Hey, this is a resistance movement. Hamas is a
exactly.
resistance movement. They're not a terrorist organization." Well, and you call them out on it, and they're very hesitant to eventually, well, okay, yeah, I guess they're terrorists, but,
Well,
you
they
know,
sometimes won't even they will only do that under duress. But
yeah,
this idea that words matter, and the media have by and large submitted to this call to change words. So, for example, the CBC and the BBC, who are these are the worst offenders, they made a decision a long time ago. They prefer to use the word militants,
yeah,
not terrorists, and there's all kinds of words that they are very, very careful to. You see it in the obituaries of terrorists like Sinwar and Yahya Sinwar and Hassan Nasrallah.
right,
They are treated. Mr. Nasrallah headed an organization called Hezbollah, which offered social services to the people of Lebanon. They very gingerly walk around all the terrorist uh, crimes that he committed
yeah.
because they don't want to offend, and half of them are in the tank for this same ideology, and they do believe Israel is evil. They do. I know they do
Hmm.
because
Yeah,
you can
I think it is an ideological
yeah.
thing. I mean, yeah, how can you not see the evil that's going on there?
Well,
And I guess we are maybe scared to offend people, but sometimes, you know what, it's necessary to offend somebody, and good can come out of it. I guess I don't want to see people yelling at each other. I've never seen any good come out of that, pretty much. But
but you see, when you corrupt language,
yeah,
as George Orwell said, if you corrupt the meanings of words, then you are able to corrupt the way people think, and
hmm,
that's what has happened. So when people say uh, resistance. This was not a crime of this was not terrorism. This was resistance of by an oppressed people against their oppressor. And oh, I see. Okay. So then these are not horrible people. These are people struggling to liberate themselves from under the yoke of, except that, of course, they weren't occupied. Gaza has not been occupied since 2005, but
right,
people don't even know that. They don't even
yeah,
know that.
yep.
They're very ignorant. And when you have people that don't know history, students that are vulnerable and gullible because they haven't learned very much, and you present a package to them which has all these pre-digested ideas boiled down to a pablum that they are spoon-fed every day in school.
Well, this is happening in our education system, isn't it? So this is part of the
It
problem,
is.
I think, as well, to a fairly significant degree. So many of our institutions, universities for sure, but it's happening, I think, also in our regular schools, even perhaps in elementary school. Okay. But, somehow the Jews are the bad guys, right? And of course, Israel's not perfect. I mean, they've got their issues over the years, but but I think, I wonder, why is this happening? And now this is what I'm told. Maybe you know a bit more about this, but I understand that a lot of our post-secondary institutions are getting funding from foreign nations, in particular Qatar, and so that's perhaps having an influence on what is being taught. Your thoughts?
Oh, yeah. Qatar is famous for the billions, literally billions, that it has spent in Middle Eastern studies departments all
Yeah.
across North America, the West, and right down to, I'm sure that they're very happy to spend money wherever it's necessary, as long as you institute their ideas and their programs. For example, this idea that there is such a thing as anti-Palestinian racism, which
Jeez.
doesn't exist because you couldn't tell a Palestinian from any other
Correct.
Middle Eastern person on the street. Um, but now it's in all the high schools, or it's starting to be in all the high schools, that there's
Hmm.
going to be a special day to talk
Right.
about anti-Palestinian racism.
Is it?
This
Is
does not
it?
exist. But there's an attempt to appropriate. If the Jews have International Holocaust Day, we have to have International Nakba Day. Nakba means disaster, so that the the state of Israel coming into being was our disaster, and so that has
Okay.
to be celebrated.
Wow.
Well,
That. Yeah. Hmm. That sounds tolerant and peaceful. Boy. Um, you wrote an article in the National Post a while back about a Muslim nation, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. So I just picked on Qatar there. But you know what? You're saying, oddly enough, they're developing good relationships with Israel. And part of this has to do with the education system. They're removing some of the anti-Semitic teaching materials from their schools. Is that what's happening?
yes,
Okay.
the Abraham Accords that Trump should have got far more credit for, but didn't because he's
Okay.
Trump.
Well,
um, it brought together the Gulf nations of the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, and Bahrain. And these Gulf states have decided that they would prefer to be peaceful, prosperous, and forward looking rather than staying mired in old disputes and old
yeah.
uh, revenge fantasies. And they are sick of the cycle of uh, revanchism and hatred and all of that. And they made a conscious decision to say, look, we don't want to have anything to do with these terror groups or the philosophy behind them or the ideology. Uh, we consider Israel belongs in this neighborhood. They have every right to be here.
Well,
Israel is their ancient homeland, it's a Jews' homeland, and there's no reason why they shouldn't be here, and we can do business with them.
that's incredible. I
It
mean,
is incredible,
that
and
took some courage, I'll tell you
no,
what.
no, it
Um,
is fantastic, and I have to say, if you ask me, what makes you hopeful, that is
yeah,
the most hopeful thing that has
yeah.
happened in
Yeah,
all
that's
of this.
incredible. I'm going to keep an eye on the United Arab Emirates to see
Yes, do keep
what's
an eye on
happening
them because
with them. Yeah.
not only have they purged their education, and this is key, in all the negotiations and the so-called peace process,
Is it?
nobody ever said we're not even going to go into negotiations until you clean up your children's educational materials. You are creating hate mongers. You are
Hmm.
your textbooks and your children's games and everything from
Right.
kindergarten on is geared to creating people that hate
Yeah.
Jews. So the UAE said, you know what? The first thing we're going to do is clean up our act, and we're taking all the anti-Semitic. Well, that made a tremendous difference. Then they invited um, uh, Jewish tourism, and they have created there's synagogue. I'm telling you that the United Arab Emirates, strange to say, is probably the safest place for a diaspora Jew to be today.
That is
They are
crazy,
welcome.
Nez.
I know, and people should
Well,
really. And then they should ask themselves, if the UAE can do this, and they're looking forward to trading with Israel and
Yeah,
tourism and
yeah.
back and forth. Well, why is this so difficult
Yeah, why
for other?
can't we? Maybe we need to change a few things here in our nation, in Canada as well, in our
Yeah,
education system, for example. Take some cues from the UAE.
I mean, and not that our textbooks are full of anti-Semitism, but
Right.
they are increasingly full of this ideology that the Palestinians are the
Yeah.
most oppressed people, that they're still refugees
Yeah.
after 75 years, which they aren't. And this idea that you can go on hoping that you're going to return 5 generations later to a place from which you became a refugee, like 60 million other refugees in the world who
Yeah. Yeah.
accepted that they
Yeah.
were not going back.
I want to ask you before we run out of time here, what can the average Canadian, the average viewer do, I guess, to help get us a better collective perspective on our Jewish neighbors?
I think the first thing that I would always tell people to do in any situation like this is to start reading widely, or viewing or seeing videos or attending webinars. Um, Ask your Jewish friends who they recommend that people for learning about the actual situation over there,
Okay.
the history of the region, so that they get their facts
Do
straight.
do some research, get the facts straight. I'm out of
And
time.
then,
I've got to leave it there. I'm sorry,
okay,
but Barbara, we'll have to do this again. A very good conversation. I want to encourage people to check out your website as well, barbarak.ca. Again, you've got a lot of good stuff on there. People need to read up, on what you're saying here. There's a lot more detail we need to get into our brains here. All right. So thanks for being with us today, Barbara. Much appreciated.
thanks for having me, Paul.
All right. Good conversation, huh? Thanks for watching today. Appreciate that. Now, you can watch or listen to the podcast on WizeUp.ca or at returntoreason.com or wherever you normally tune into podcasts. All right. So if you have any comments, suggestions, fire them off to us at paul@wiseup.ca. God bless.